Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Play Sonic Advance 2. In the last part, we went through a few more zones, getting here to Sky Canyon, and now it's time for us to go through the rest of this zone and most of the next one, I think, not the rest of it. Now, something I forget if I brought up or not, I know I've said I love this game's soundtrack before, but something they do really neat with the music is that they pull a bit of a Sonic 3 here, where the two acts, by and large, share the same melody, but they go with very different instrumentations on each one. And I think probably some of the best cases of that are in the zones after Sky Canyon, but by and large, the Act 2 themes I like a lot more than the Act 1 themes, except for specifically Leaf Forest, if only because that's like the first song you hear in the game, and it's the one I heard the most growing up, just because I would get to Sky Canyon, game over, and just go back there, despite the fact you can start a stage wherever you want. So it was probably just me going, I'll go back to stages I can beat more than anything. Don't underestimate, by the way, if you're trying to get like boost speed going on, the power of a spring when you enter it at a relatively high speed to begin with, because they can pretty regularly boost you up to the afterimage speed type, and that can be very useful for getting anywhere quickly. Additionally, here in Sky Canyon, if you're trying to get more speed going, I recommend running against the fans you see every here and there, because what they're meant to do is just speed you up along a certain direction, but if you run against them long enough, you actually will build speed up, and you can hit the point where you hit that sonic boom and go super fast. At that point, you just need to sacrifice about a second's worth of speed to reverse your direction, and you'll be fine. Also, this is kind of a weird thing for me to focus on all of a sudden, but something I really like about Advance 2 that I haven't really pointed out about a lot of other Sonic games, only because you don't really notice them as much while you're playing. Advance 2's backgrounds for the stages, barring maybe the next one, are very pretty. The only other Sonic background I can think of off the top of my mind that I've actively like spent time looking at is like Green Hill, Emerald Hill, Labyrinth Zone, unfortunately, and Ice Cap Zone, specifically because of the boss at the end of it. Although, was that the Act 1 boss? Yeah, I think I'm thinking of the Act 1 boss. But now, speaking of bosses, we're on to Sky Canyons. Another boss I do not like. This is the Egg Saucer... Knuckles, what are you doing here, buddy? Oh, did someone get tricked again? Ah, great. This boss can be rather troublesome, though. It does have something you can destroy to make it a little easier, namely that little laser beam that will every now and then just fire off at you. You can destroy that with 4 individual hits. What's hard about this fight is, for one thing, the window to hit Knuckles until you hit the until you destroy the laser is pretty short, because he's only a third of the circle, whereas if you destroy the laser, the elements adjust so that he's at the 50-50 mark. But you can only really hit Knuckles on the very top of his dome. By the way, if you come here with any other character first, this is Eggman instead. But what makes this fight so dangerous is the hand that's slapping. It's pretty common for it to happen. I thankfully avoided it throughout the playthroughs I did for this LP. But the hand is dangerous in that it can very easily crush you if you get right in the center of its hitbox, or especially, it has an attack that's not just where it claps the screen. It can do a little wave around in a circle. If it waves around and hits you while you're on the ground, while it's moving downwards, you're likely to get crushed by it. And in that regard, this can be one of the most dangerous bosses in the game. On top of that, because of how movement happy the hand is, it's probably one of the easiest bosses to get hit in, period, in the game, because not only does it have a long range, you might think you're safe, but if it decides to move a different pattern, all of a sudden you're probably going to get touched by it, and that just feels bad. The instant kill potential on top of just the wide range is why with this fight, more than a couple others, you see me hanging back pretty far until especially Knuckles looks like he's ready to be hit. Because if I'm standing too close to this thing like I tried to with a lot of the other bosses, I will probably just get my shit wrecked, and that's a lost life, and, well, lost lives don't really mean a lot in this. I'd still rather avoid the deaths if I can, you know what I mean? I am glad, though, that when you destroy the laser, that the hand and Knuckles actively readjust to be on opposite sides instead of just staying at their 1/3 marks, because that would be really weird to work with. But that's Sky Canyon. This is definitely the point in the game where the danger level gets stepped up, especially if you don't know how to use tricks, or if you're very prone to taking lower routes where the bottomless pits are much more actively a threat. You know, the strangest thing just happened. You let Eggman dupe you, again! Leave me alone! Whatever, see ya, Knuckles. Hey! I won't let Eggman get away with this. You can now play as Knuckles. We'll be taking a look at him at the latter 2 stages of the next zone. Speaking of which, time for Techno Base. I apologize for potential bitrate stuff here because the background here gets kinda flashy on top of just the main stage itself. So the main thing with this stage is that it's got a lot of cybernetic type stuff going on, but the main gimmicks are bridges that are only there sometimes, and blocks that the moment you step on them, they will move you as, they act as elevators essentially, will move you up or down, left or right, depends on the one. And some of them actively carry your momentum, namely the left and right ones. The up and down ones don't as much. But what's notable about this is that it's arguably one of the hardest stages to figure out how to get all 7 special rings on because you actively need to backtrack in the stage, which is the only case I think in the game you need to do this from memory, to the point where I remember when I was practicing for the LP, looking at some old guides, and some of them think you actually can't get all the special rings in this stage if memory serves. On top of that, there's also a little bit of a pinball thing to this stage where there's little bumpers on certain walls that will bounce you back left and right, and you need to use those to get one of the special rings later on in it. So I think it's about time we finally tackle one thing with the game, and that's its story. According to the US manual, the deranged scientist Dr. Eggman has devised another dastardly scheme. He's planning to build a Dr. Eggman empire by kidnapping the animals and turning them into robots. This time he's also kidnapped Knuckles and Tails. Alright, that's the only thing that's new there. That's not very dastardly. Dr. Eggman, you fiend, now I'm coming after you to rescue my pals. Off-speed Sonic on a new adventure to find his friends and stop the scientist's despicable plot. I feel like there's a paragraph that should be there, maybe explaining more about what his goal is, but I guess they're just like, nah, it's by the numbers. There are also little character bios. For instance, Sonic is the world's fastest supersonic hedgehog. He's basically carefree, but he can't stand evil. He can be short-tempered, but it would go against his kind nature to not help someone in trouble. Cream is an adorable rabbit that takes her tiny chow cheese wherever she goes. She can act a little childish at times, but tries hard at everything she does and never forgets her manners. She can fly by flapping her ears like wings. Knuckles is Sonic's friend and rival with his normal strength and spiked fists. He packs a powerful punch and can climb walls easily. He is brave of heart and strong-willed, but can sometimes be a little gullible. You don't say. Tails, Miles Tails per Hour, is a gentle fox with 2 tails and dreams of being just like Sonic. He loves tinkering with machinery and sometimes builds robots to help his hero. He can fly by spinning his tails like helicopter blades. There's another character bio after that we're going to be ignoring until next time, but for right now, Dr. Eggman, aka Dr. Robotnik, because they were still like, yeah, the old name exists at this point, whereas nowadays Robotnik's more or less ignored as a name. Without a thought for anyone else, this evil genius is always hatching plots to take over the world. His plans are always followed by Sonic, but he never learns his lesson. Yeah. Although, actually, now that I think about it, I want to bring up another topic. I wonder, does the manual actively bring this up? Because I know they bring up all the Bane mechanics, like the tricks you can do off of springs. But I forget, do they actively mention the multiplayer stuff for this game? Because there is multiplayer. But it's a little more limited than Sonic Advance 1's from memory. There's multi-pack game mode and a single-pack game mode. I think the single-pack game mode is essentially just a ring race, where each player takes a turn holding the GBA and just plays through the game stages and tries to get the highest amount of rings. Whoever gets the highest wins. I want to say the multi-pack multiplayer in this game, though, is just racing through a stage, like what Sonic 3 had. Although I think in this game's case, it's actively the main game stages, and the usual item boxes that rotate what they got is in there, I think. The Chow hunting version of the stages that was in Sonic Advance 1's multiplayer that I think I talked about back when, I think that's completely absent now. Little weird, but at the same time, I feel like they only added multiplayer in these games specifically just because the GBA was a portable and multiplayer was such a big part of what you could do with the link cable to begin with, thanks to things like Pokemon. So it was more or less them going, we might as well add something in there, I guess. Can put that on the box. Let's see, this is Special Stage 6 at this point, I think. It's around the previous Special Stage where things really do start to get pretty tight in terms of keeping a combo going to get up to 300 rings. I'd still say these are easier special stages, but if you're going to fail any of them, I'd say it's most likely going to be numbers 5, 6, or especially 7, because the layouts start getting pretty complicated, and keeping a combo going just gets worse and worse. It might be worthwhile trying to go for smaller combos in the long run, and then just grabbing whatever versions of little 5-ring smart bomb looking things at a Star Fox you can grab, because I don't think I've talked about those directly yet. Those give you 5 rings, but they are also multiplied by the multiplayers you can get for combos. So those can get up to being worth 45 rings each, which, unlikely that you're going to run into being able to do that often, but if you can, it is a big boost towards getting any of the Chaos Emeralds that I could recommend. It's just good luck. Also, gee, I'm so disappointed they didn't bring back the flashing rainbow background from Sonic CD Special Stage 7, I think, was that 6? Sarcasm, of course. I actually really like how the backgrounds look in this. They're pretty generic in that they're just a lot of shapes, but I like the colors. They're not distracting, they're just a nice little visual thing. For now, though, it's time for us to take a good look at playing our last main playable character, good old Red.
Knuckle!
I love Techno Base Act 2's music. It's so good. So Knuckles has a lot of his usual shtick, mechanically, from his other playable appearances. He can do a glide that allows him to fly long distances, but he can't ascend with it, but he doesn't drop nearly as quickly as other characters who can fly in the game does. He's got a punch attack that's basically useless. It requires coming to a complete stop and doesn't even have a combo with it. And by gliding into walls, he can actively climb up and down them, which not only allows you to potentially save yourself from certain bottomless pits in the game, which is kind of helpful in that regard alone. It also allows you to potentially go into routes you're not meant to go back to for special rings, or just get to certain pathways a little earlier if you know where level design is. What's kind of interesting about him, though, is that his tricks kind of lead into a lot of his other abilities compared to some other characters. Like, if you do the R and forward thing off of a spring or ramp, it's a version of his glide that actively moves faster. And when you land on the floor after that, you'll actively roll up into a ball to potentially keep the momentum going in the case you're, like, near a slope. His downwards trick, though, is probably one of the worst in the game because it's just a downwards punch that looks cool. But it doesn't bounce off of anything, and it's not even very effective at killing enemies, because I think it might have one of the smaller hitboxes of the set in that regard. Knuckles is a character that I like to play in some games, but it really depends on how the level design uses his abilities. I think, honestly, in that regard, potentially, like, Mania or 3 Knuckles are still arguably some of the best games to play as him to this day in. If only because, like, the level design frequently takes him into account. Some of the advanced games, in fact every one of the advanced games, doesn't really do that well. I guess Advanced 3 does technically, but it more so takes into account some of the abilities you get by teaming him up with certain characters. I think probably his greatest weakness is that all of the other characters in the game have abilities that also come into play not only in the stages, but well in the boss fights. None of Knuckles' abilities are very useful in boss fights because of the running setup every single one of them has, barring exactly one. So in that regard, he just kind of feels like an afterthought, I guess is the way I want to phrase it. Kind of sad. Speaking of bosses, though, it's time for Techno Base's boss, and this is one I do not like. I hate this one. This is the Egg Go round. We have to jump on the platforms around Eggman and just impact his dome and do that 8 times. What's annoying about this is the way that this boss's attacks work. 2 of the attacks are based around the platforms. One is just firing 3 projectiles at a time out of the little dot in the center of the main sphere. For one thing, I don't like the projectiles because they home in on you pretty well, but there's not enough telegraphing, I think, for them firing out, like a sound effect for them. They just kind of fire. But the platform attacks are arguably more annoying because they can be pulled out pretty frequently with very little warning besides a little beep 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 like you're hearing. The kind of like blue, like pale blue platforms rotate and try to throw you off of them. The gold platforms will just send spikes straight up your feet. And that's arguably the more annoying one because they can just spam that over and over again, and depending on how the other platforms are reacting, that fight can take forever just because if you get bad luck, there's not a chance to really step on them to hit the main body. And I hate it. Not a fan, not a fan. So of course I had to play it with every single character in the game. For now, though, it's time for our last normal zone in the game. This is Egg Utopia, very Death Egg-like. I'm really surprised they actually don't directly name it in the story, talking about Eggman's building a successor to the Death Egg. I don't know why I'm saying this like a bad South Park comedy thing. This stage is interesting in that there's a little bit of anti-gravity going on in it, but not at all places. It works a bit closer to, actually, like Death Egg, in that there's some portions where you're just gonna see like a little red sign with an up or down arrow on it. And whenever you cross that is when the gravity actively swaps. On top of that, there's a lot of boosters that send you forward in different ways. There's little cannons you have to fire yourself out of. This zone's honestly kind of fun. With that said, getting one of its special rings, the one I'm going for right now, can be a little rough as Sonic or the final character in the game first. Because it requires you to realize something about grind rails with these two characters specifically, because everyone else has a way to ascend walls. Whenever you're going fast on a grind rail and you're at a horizontal section, you can jump off and you can do a trick off of that, like the double jump, the spin dash forward, all that. And you're required to do that in order to actively get up the wall to get that second ring pretty easily. There's also poles you dance around, and you just kind of have to jump left and right off of them. I guess it's kind of a follow-up to the poles in the underwater sections of Hydro City, where you had to reposition yourself so you don't go into an enemy or spikes. But you are actively falling down them because gravity. So you have to keep that part in mind, at least. I like this zone a lot, but be careful, because whenever you're not inside the station, like we are right now, whenever you're just on, like, a lot of the grind rails, where you can see the planet in the background, the entire bottom of that section is a bottomless pit, and you go through about 2 or 3 of those per act. So it can be a little risky to do jumps unless you know where you're going. Not that there's not bottomless pits in the station section, because there definitely is, and there are a lot of them. But there's less to worry about. In comparison, at least. Gotta say though, Eggman, like, I was making fun of your plan for being unoriginal in the manual, but if your plan involves another version of the Death Egg, like, come on, guy. This is like, what, technically the 4th time, I think, in total you've tried this? Maybe 5th? I think I might be forgetting one of the games even that might even have a Death Egg-like space station in it. Unlike the Game Gear, or maybe I've only played Sonic Pocket Adventure like once or twice. I don't remember if the Death Egg is a plot element in that. I know the final boss is just Doomsday Zone again, which was always kind of weird. I'll cover that game at some point. Because it's technically what started the quote-unquote modern era, even though it's not quite so modern anymore. It's more like the Dreamcast era, because it's I think that was the first game with the green eyes. A character design trait I like a lot, but for some reason a lot of people were really mad about back when, and then we just had people like that continuously mad whenever anything changed in Sonic. Besides, weirdly, the voice actor, and even then we had a bit of that if memory serves for Sonic Colors. I love the Sonic fan base. There's a lot of really good stuff in it, a lot of good fan art, a lot of good people. But then there's the people who just complain about X and Y because Z in a way that feels like that's just because it's not what they had when they were kids, kind of deal. But that's a topic for a different day. For now, it's time for our final special stage where nothing really different happens. I'm actually kind of surprised they don't try to, like, make Zero move faster in these special stages the further you get in, or maybe add in extras to deal with. Because the fact that the main thing that changes is just the harder layout of rings makes them feel like the difficulty curve is very minimal. This is easily the hardest one. This is the one I've failed the most, but a good step to take with this one and a lot of the others I don't think I've talked about is to start from the outside and go in. Like, if you stay around the perimeter at first, you can get some pretty decent chains of rings to get some multipliers going, to get some decent early rings. And if you move towards the center from there, especially diagonally, you can usually find enough chains meant for you to do that with, that you can just kind of go from there. The annoying thing, though, and I think I've talked about this before, for getting all 7 Chaos Emeralds, we're not going to be able to play as Super Sonic in normal levels. It just allows us, as long as you do it with Sonic, to get the true ending. There are things you get for getting all 7 Chaos Emeralds with every successive character after that, until the final one, technically. And we're going to be showing all those off next part, but it doesn't really feel worth the effort to go through all of it, even as short as this game is, with one character. It's just a thing of it feeling draining, and I think a lot of that comes down to the fact, again, of due to the character abilities being very samey, and due to the special rings only being along one route, period, there's not really much variation you can do in the levels if you want to get everything quickly. It's not like, say, Sonic 3, where different character abilities led to different routes frequently that were meant for that character specifically, and there were special rings along that meant for that character, or you could find ways back to other pathways to get them earlier. It's just one of those things where it's not necessarily a problem with the game, it's a symptom of what they designed it to do otherwise kind of deal, I guess is the way I want to phrase it. But with that, I'm going to need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and in part 4 we're going to take the fight to Eggman to end the game off, but not before taking a look at all of our rewards for getting all 7 Chaos Emeralds. See you guys then.